May 1945. The island of Okinawa. A 400-foot jagged cliff called the Maeda Escarpment rises from the blood-soaked earth. At the top, one man remains while everyone else retreats. He carries no weapon, no rifle, no pistol, no knife. Only a Bible and a medic's bag. In the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, where survival means killing, this soldier refuses to take a single life. Instead, he will save 75 of them, alone. Unarmed, under relentless enemy fire. His name is Desmond Doss, and he will become the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor. But his story begins not on Okinawa, it begins in the hills of Virginia, with a framed picture of the Ten Commandments. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia. His father, William, was a carpenter and a veteran of the First World War. His mother, Bertha, was a devout Seventh-day Adventist who raised her children with an unwavering faith in the Bible. The family was poor. They lived in the Fairview Heights neighborhood on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Desmond had an older sister named Audrey and a younger brother named Harold. William Doss had returned from the trenches of France a broken man. The war had left scars that never healed. He drank. He struggled with what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder. The violence of the Western Front had followed him home. But it was something in the Doss household that would shape young Desmond more than anything else. His father had purchased a framed poster at an auction. It depicted the Ten Commandments, each one illustrated with a biblical scene. The poster hung prominently on the wall of the family home. And one image in particular captivated the boy. The sixth commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." The illustration showed Cain standing over the body of his murdered brother Abel, a club still in his hand. Young Desmond would stare at that picture for hours. He could not comprehend what he was seeing. "I wondered," he later recalled, "how in the world could a brother do such a thing? It put a horror in my heart of just killing." That horror deepened one night when Desmond witnessed something that would stay with him forever. His father and his uncle had been drinking. An argument escalated. Voices rose. Then William Doss pulled out a gun and pointed it at his brother-in-law. Bertha Doss stepped between them. She demanded that her husband hand over the weapon. The confrontation seemed to last an eternity. Finally, William surrendered the gun. Bertha took it and pressed it into young Desmond's hands. "Run," she told him. "Hide it." Desmond ran. He hid the gun. And in that moment he made a vow. He would never hold a gun again. He would never take a life. The image of Cain and Abel was no longer just a picture on the wall. It was a warning. It was a commandment he would obey until his dying breath. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Desmond Doss was working as a joiner at the Newport News Naval Shipyard in Virginia. His job was considered essential to the war effort. He could have received a deferment. Many men in his position did exactly that. But Doss felt a moral obligation to serve. His friends were enlisting. His brother Harold joined the Navy. Desmond believed in the cause. He believed the fight against fascism was a fight for freedom, including religious freedom. He could not stand by while others sacrificed. There was only one problem. He refused to carry a weapon. On April 1, 1942, Desmond Doss enlisted in the United States Army at Camp Lee, Virginia. Under a 1940 law, men whose religious beliefs prevented them from bearing arms could serve in non-combatant roles. Doss requested assignment as a combat medic. He figured that as a medic, he could, as he put it, be like Christ, saving life instead of taking life. The Army classified him as a conscientious objector. Doss hated the term. He was not objecting to the war. He was not refusing to serve. He was willing to go anywhere, face any danger, endure any hardship. He simply would not kill. He preferred to call himself a conscientious cooperator. He was assigned to the medical detachment of the 307th Infantry Regiment, 77th Infantry Division. The 77th was known as the Statue of Liberty Division. Its men came from all over America, and they wanted nothing to do with Desmond Doss. From the moment he arrived at basic training, Doss became a target. He was small. He was quiet. He spoke with a gentle southern drawl. He read his Bible. He prayed on his knees every night. He refused to train on Saturdays, which Seventh-day Adventists observe as the Sabbath. And he would not touch a rifle. His fellow soldiers saw him as a coward, a liability, a misfit who would get them killed. He was immediately branded with a scarlet letter, so to speak, one soldier later recalled. No one wanted to be in his unit. No one wanted to share a foxhole with a man who would not fight back. The harassment was relentless. When Doss knelt to pray at night, soldiers threw their boots at him. They called him names: Coward, Yellow, Holy Joe. They made his life miserable in ways large and small. One soldier issued a direct threat. "Doss, when we get into combat, I'll make sure you don't come back alive." Doss never retaliated. He never raised his voice. He never wavered. His commanding officers were equally hostile. Captain Jack Glover wanted him transferred out of the unit. Other officers attempted to have Doss discharged on the grounds of mental illness. He refused to accept. They threatened him with court-martial for refusing weapons training. Still, he would not bend. "I knew if I ever once compromised," Doss later explained, "I was gonna be in trouble, because if you can compromise once, you can compromise again." The Army could not break him, and eventually they stopped trying. Desmond Doss shipped out with the 77th Division in the summer of 1944, bound for the Pacific Theater. The men who had threatened to kill him were now stuck with him. They would have to wait and see what the Bible-reading pacifist would do when the bullets started flying. They did not have to wait long. The 77th Division landed on Guam in July 1944. The fighting was brutal. Japanese defenders had fortified the island and contested every inch of ground. This was Doss's first taste of combat, and he proved something that surprised everyone. He was fearless. While other medics waited for the wounded to be brought to them, Doss went forward. He crawled into the open under fire to reach fallen soldiers. He treated their wounds while bullets cracked overhead. He dragged them to safety one by one. He worked at night, crawling among the bodies in the darkness, checking to see who was still alive. Fellow soldiers warned him that he could be shot by friendly fire. He kept going anyway. At night, that's when Desmond done a lot of his work, one soldier remembered. He'd go out and crawl around amongst our boys and see if they wasn't dead. He'd take care of them, drag them back. He wasn't supposed to do it at night. For his bravery on Guam, Doss was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for valor. After Guam came Leyte in the Philippines. The fighting was even worse. And Doss's reputation grew. Time after time, he ran into fire to save wounded men. Once he darted into the open to treat a soldier, while a Japanese sniper had him dead in his sights. His fellow soldiers watched in horror, unable to return fire without hitting their own men. They expected to see Doss killed, but the shot never came. Years later, a missionary in Japan would hear a remarkable story. After a church service, a Japanese man approached one of the deacons. "That could very well have been me," the man said. "I was there, and I remember having a soldier in my gun sight, but I couldn't pull the trigger." Whether divine intervention or coincidence, something had protected Desmond Doss. He earned a second Bronze Star on Leyte. And by the time the 77th Division shipped out for its next assignment, something had changed. The men who had thrown boots at him now wanted him close. The soldiers who had called him a coward now trusted him with their lives. They had seen what he was willing to do for them. They knew that if they fell, Doss would come for them. He would crawl through hell itself to bring them back. The pariah had become indispensable. In April 1945, the 77th Division received its orders. They were going to Okinawa. The island was 340 miles from mainland Japan. Taking it would provide the staging ground for the final invasion of the Japanese home islands. The battle would be one of the largest and bloodiest of the entire Pacific War. The men of the 307th Infantry had no idea what awaited them. But they knew one thing. They wanted Desmond Doss with them. The medic who carried no weapon was about to face the greatest test of his life. Operation Iceberg began on April 1, 1945. It was the largest amphibious assault in the history of the Pacific Theater. More than 180,000 American troops would participate in the invasion. Their target was Okinawa, a 60-mile-long island in the Ryukyu chain, just 340 miles from mainland Japan. The strategic calculus was simple. Take Okinawa, and American bombers would have a base within easy striking distance of Tokyo. Take Okinawa, and the Navy would have an advanced anchorage for the final push. Take Okinawa, and the invasion of Japan itself could begin. The Japanese understood this perfectly. They had spent years preparing. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima commanded the Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa. He had approximately 100,000 troops at his disposal, and he had no intention of fighting the way Americans expected. Ushijima did not contest the beaches. When American forces stormed ashore on April 1st, they met almost no resistance. Some commanders thought it was a trap. They were right. The Japanese had allowed the Americans onto the island deliberately. Now they would grind them down in a war of attrition. The heart of the Japanese defense was a network of fortified positions stretching across the southern portion of the island. The terrain was ideal for defense. Rugged hills and escarpments provided natural strong points. The Japanese had spent years tunneling into these positions, creating an underground fortress of caves, bunkers, and pillboxes. Artillery and mortars were pre-registered on every approach. Machine guns covered every avenue of advance. At the center of this defensive line stood the most formidable obstacle of all. The Americans would give it many names. Some called it Hacksaw Ridge. Others called it Sawtooth. The men who had to take it simply called it that big son of a bitch. Its official designation was the Maeda Escarpment. The escarpment was a 400-foot-high ridge that ran across most of southern Okinawa. For the first 350 feet, the slope was steep but climbable. Then came the final 50 feet, a sheer rock face, an overhang that could only be scaled with ladders or cargo nets. And at the top, the Japanese were waiting. The Japanese had been there for years, Doss would later recall. They had that mountain honeycombed and camouflaged it looked like natural terrain. That's what we had to face. The fortifications were extraordinary. Tunnels connected fighting positions throughout the ridge. Pillboxes provided interlocking fields of fire. Caves sheltered troops from American bombardment, allowing them to emerge and counterattack the moment the shelling stopped. The reverse slope was invisible to American artillery observers, making it nearly impossible to suppress the defenders. The Maeda Escarpment was the key to the entire Shuri defensive line. As long as the Japanese held it, they controlled southern Okinawa. The Americans had no choice. They had to take it. The 96th Infantry Division drew the assignment first. On April 26th, they began their assault. What followed was a nightmare. American artillery pounded the escarpment with more than 1,600 rounds in a single day. It made no difference. The Japanese simply retreated into their tunnels and waited. When the infantry advanced, they emerged and cut the Americans to pieces. The 381st Infantry Regiment led the initial attacks. They tried to climb the escarpment with ladders. They were slaughtered. They tried cargo nets. They were slaughtered. Every man who reached the top was killed or driven back within hours. The Japanese would allow small groups to gain the summit, then launch devastating counterattacks that pushed them off. In 4 days of fighting, the 381st Infantry suffered 536 casualties at Maeda alone. The regiment's total losses exceeded 1,000 men. By the time they were pulled off the line, the 381st was down to 40% of its authorized strength. The psychological toll was equally devastating. Men who had survived some of the worst fighting in the Pacific broke down completely. Some soldiers sobbed and said they would not go back up. Others simply stared into the distance, unable to speak. The escarpment was destroying them. On April 29th, the 77th Infantry Division moved into the line to relieve the shattered 96th. The 307th Infantry Regiment, Desmond Doss's unit, took over responsibility for the Maeda escarpment sector. General Andrew D. Bruce, commanding the 77th, assumed control of operations on April 30th. Fresh troops, new commanders. It made no difference. A company of the 307th made the first attempt. They mounted 4 50-foot ladders spliced together end to end at the eastern edge of the escarpment near a rock formation called the Needle. The men began to climb. Every single one of them was killed. The Japanese had zeroed their weapons on the climbing routes. They waited until the Americans were exposed on the ladders, then opened fire. There was no cover, no concealment. The men died on the ropes or tumbled back down the cliff face. A company was nearly annihilated. The ridge seemed impregnable. Every approach was covered by fire. Every assault ended in disaster. The bodies of American soldiers littered the slopes. The wounded lay where they had fallen, crying for help that could not reach them. The Japanese picked off anyone who tried to retrieve them. But the Americans had no choice. The escarpment had to be taken. The entire advance on Okinawa depended on it. On May 2, 1945, B Company prepared for another assault. This time they would try a different approach. Cargo nets had been rigged on the western portion of the escarpment, away from the killing ground at the Needle. The survivors of A Company would join them. 155 men in total. Among them was Private First Class Desmond Doss. The men gathered at the base of the cliff in the pre-dawn darkness. They checked their weapons. They said their prayers. Some wrote final letters home. Everyone knew what awaited them at the top. Everyone knew that many of them would not come back down. The climb began. Hand over hand, the men hauled themselves up the cargo nets. The cliff face scraped against their uniforms. Their rifles banged against the rocks. Below them, the ground fell away. Above them, the lip of the escarpment waited like the edge of the world. They reached the top. They fanned out across the plateau. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then all hell broke loose. The Japanese had been waiting. They had watched the Americans climb. They had let them reach the summit. Now they opened fire with everything they had. Artillery shells explode across the plateau. Mortar rounds walk through the American positions. Machine guns rake the exposed troops from hidden pillboxes. Men are cut down before they can find cover. The noise is deafening. The chaos is absolute. The assault collapses within minutes. Approximately 75 men are hit in the initial barrage. The survivors scramble for any protection they can find. Screams mix with explosions. Blood soaks into the rocky ground. The order comes to retreat. The able-bodied men begin falling back toward the cargo nets. They slide and tumble down the cliff face, desperate to escape the killing ground above. Of the 155 men who climbed up, only 55 are able to make it back down under their own power. 100 men remain on the plateau, wounded, dying, trapped. And one medic refuses to leave them. Desmond Doss watches his company retreat. He hears the cries of the wounded still echoing from above. He knows what awaits anyone who stays on that plateau. Japanese soldiers, enemy fire, almost certain death. He does not hesitate. "I had these men up there and I shouldn't leave them," he would later explain. "They were my buddies. Some of the men had families, and they trust me. I didn't feel like I should value my life above my buddies." While 154 men climb down, one man stays behind. He carries no weapon. He has only his medical bag, his faith, and a single rope. The sun is rising over Hacksaw Ridge, and Desmond Doss begins to pray. Doss had only one rope. It had been rigged to haul ammunition and supplies up the escarpment. Now it would serve a different purpose. During basic training, Doss had practiced tying knots like every other soldier. The bowline was standard Army instruction. But one day, he had made a mistake. Instead of creating a single loop, he had tied the rope wrong and ended up with 2 loops. A double bowline. He had thought nothing of it at the time. Now, crouching on the blood-soaked plateau of Hacksaw Ridge, that accidental knot came back to him. He would later say that God had brought it to his mind. 2 loops meant he could secure a wounded man under both arms and around the chest. 2 loops meant stability. 2 loops meant he could lower men down a 50-foot cliff without them slipping out. Doss found a tree stump near the edge of the escarpment. He wrapped the rope around it, creating an anchor. He fashioned a makeshift sling from the double bowline. Then he went to find the wounded. They were everywhere. Some lay in the open where they had fallen. Others had crawled into shell craters or behind rocks. Many were unconscious. Some were crying out. A few were silent, their eyes tracking Doss as he moved through the carnage. The Japanese were still firing. Mortars continued to fall. Machine guns swept the plateau in deadly arcs. Any movement drew attention. Any exposure invited death. Doss ignored it all. He crawls to the nearest wounded man, checks his injuries, applies a bandage, then he grabs the soldier by the collar and begins dragging him toward the cliff edge. The man is heavy, the ground is rough, every inch is agony, but Doss keeps pulling. He reaches the stump. He loops the rope around the wounded soldier, securing him in the double bowline. He checks the knots one final time. Then he begins to lower the man over the edge. The rope burns through his hands. The weight pulls against his arms. Below, other soldiers wait to receive the wounded. Doss feeds out the line, hand over hand, until he feels the tension release. The first man is down. Doss pulls the rope back up. He coils it quickly. And then he speaks the words that will define the next 12 hours of his life. Lord, help me get one more. He goes back into the fire. The second rescue is harder. The wounded man is farther from the cliff edge. Doss has to drag him nearly 100 yards, while Japanese bullets crack past his head. He does not stop. He does not seek cover. He reaches the stump, secures the soldier, lowers him down. Lord, help me get one more. The third rescue, the fourth, the fifth. Each time, Doss returns to the killing ground. Each time, he finds another wounded man. Each time, he drags him to safety and lowers him over the edge. Each time, he prays the same prayer. Lord, help me get one more, just one more. The hours blur together. The sun climbs higher. The heat becomes oppressive. Doss's hands are raw and bleeding from the rope. His uniform is soaked with sweat and other men's blood. His muscles scream for rest. He does not stop. Japanese soldiers spot him. They fire. Somehow, they miss. They fire again. They miss again. At one point, enemy troops advance to within feet of where Doss is treating a wounded man. Before they can shoot, one of the wounded Americans kills them. Doss continues his work. Reports would later circulate about what the Japanese experienced that day. One account described a soldier who repeatedly tried to shoot the unarmed medic, but found that his rifle jammed every time he pulled the trigger. Another spoke of a soldier who had Doss clearly in his sights, but simply could not bring himself to fire. Whether these stories are literal truth or battlefield legend, something extraordinary was happening on that ridge. Veteran Carl Bentley, who witnessed Doss's actions that day, struggled to explain what he saw. It's as if God had his hand on his shoulder, he said. It's the only explanation I can give. The rescues continue. 10 men, 20, 30. Doss loses count. He is not thinking about numbers. He is thinking about the next man, the next trip to the cliff edge, the next prayer. Lord, help me get one more. Some of the men he saves are the same soldiers who had tormented him in training, the ones who threw boots at him during prayers, the ones who called him a coward, the ones who threatened to kill him. Doss does not discriminate. He does not hesitate. Every wounded man is his brother. 40 men, 50. The afternoon wears on. Doss is running on nothing but faith and adrenaline. His body should have given out hours ago. Still, he continues. When the 12-hour ordeal finally ends, Doss has lowered an estimated 75 men to safety. He has averaged one rescue every 10 minutes. He has done it alone, unarmed, under constant enemy fire, on a plateau that had already claimed hundreds of American lives. The Army would later try to determine exactly how many men Doss saved. They calculated that of the 155 soldiers who climbed the escarpment, only 55 were able to retreat without assistance. That meant 100 men had been left behind. Officers concluded that Doss must have saved 100 lives. Doss disagreed. "Couldn't be," he said. "It couldn't have been more than 50. I wouldn't have had the time to save 100 men." In the end, they compromised. The official Medal of Honor citation would credit Desmond Doss with saving 75 lives. It was a number that satisfied neither the Army's count nor Doss's humility. But the exact figure hardly mattered. What mattered was that dozens of men who should have died on Hacksaw Ridge went home to their families because one medic refused to leave them behind. The battle for the escarpment was not over. For 3 more days, American forces struggled to secure the position. Doss remained with his company, treating wounded, praying, doing everything he could to keep his men alive. Then came May 5, 1945. The date fell on a Saturday. For Desmond Doss, that meant the Sabbath. From sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, Seventh-day Adventists devoted themselves to rest and worship. Doss had honored this practice his entire life. It had nearly gotten him court-martialed. It had earned him the contempt of fellow soldiers. He had never compromised. But on May 5th, the final assault was planned to take Hacksaw Ridge once and for all. B Company was ordered to advance, and Doss was the only medic left in the unit. Captain Vernon approached him personally. "The men would like to have you with them," he said, "and so would I." Doss did not refuse. Christ had healed on the Sabbath, and he could do no less. But he made one request. He asked for time to finish his morning Bible study and close with a prayer. Captain Vernon submitted the request up the chain of command. It reached Colonel Hamilton. The colonel could have denied it. The assault was critical. Every minute mattered. Dozens of officers and hundreds of men were waiting. Colonel Hamilton approved the delay. The entire American advance on Hacksaw Ridge waited while Desmond Doss finished reading his Bible. The entire operation paused while the medic who carried no weapon knelt in prayer. The men who had once thrown shoes at his devotions now refused to attack without his blessing. Doss completed his study, he closed his Bible, he said his prayer, then he rose and joined his company for the assault. The Americans attacked. And this time, they took the ridge. B Company suffered only one casualty in the final assault, a single man injured by a falling rock. Other companies in the attack took heavier losses. But the unit that had waited for their medic to pray came through virtually unscathed. By the time the sun set on May 5, 1945, Hacksaw Ridge belonged to the Americans. The position that had cost hundreds of lives, that had broken entire regiments, that had seemed impossible to take, was finally secured. The men of B Company knew who deserved the credit. It was not the generals or the artillery or the tanks. It was a skinny kid from Virginia who carried no weapon and never stopped praying. "Lord, help me get one more." He had gotten them all. Hacksaw Ridge had fallen, but the battle for Okinawa continued. The Japanese 32nd Army had retreated south toward Shuri, where they prepared another desperate defense. American forces pursued them through terrain that seemed designed for slaughter. Every hill was fortified. Every cave concealed enemies. Every step forward cost blood. Desmond Doss remained with B Company. He had already done more than any man could reasonably be asked to do. He had earned his place in history. No one would have blamed him if he had requested a transfer to the rear. He had saved 75 lives. Surely that was enough. It was not enough. Not for Doss. As long as his men were fighting, he would be with them. As long as there were wounded to treat, he would treat them. He had made a promise to be by their side saving life while they took life. He intended to keep it. On May 21, 1945, American forces launched a night attack on high ground near Shuri. B Company advanced through darkness toward Japanese positions. The enemy was waiting. The attack stalled almost immediately. Japanese fire raked the American lines. Men dove for cover wherever they could find it. The night erupted with muzzle flashes and explosions. Tracers crisscrossed the darkness like deadly fireflies. Doss did not take cover. While his company huddled in foxholes and shell craters, Doss remained in the open. Wounded men were crying out across the battlefield. They needed help. They needed him. He moved from casualty to casualty, exposing himself to fire that could not distinguish friend from foe in the darkness. He risked being shot by Japanese soldiers. He risked being shot by his own men, who might mistake him for an infiltrating enemy. He kept working. The hours passed. Doss treated wound after wound. He applied bandages, administered morphine, whispered encouragement to men who were terrified they were going to die. The night seemed endless. The firing never stopped. Then came the grenade. Doss had taken shelter in a shell hole with 2 riflemen. They were catching their breath, preparing to move again. None of them saw the Japanese soldier who crept close enough to throw. The grenade landed at Doss's feet. There was no time to run, no time to throw it back. Doss kicked at the grenade, trying to knock it away from his companions. The explosion caught him in mid-motion. The blast sent him flying. Shrapnel tore into his legs and ripped upward into his hip. 17 pieces of metal embedded themselves in his body. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Doss collapsed onto the ground, his legs shredded, his blood pooling beneath him. Any other man would have screamed for a medic. Any other man would have called for help immediately. Doss did not. He knew that calling another medic into this fire-swept area would put that man's life at risk. He could not do it. Instead, Doss treated his own wounds. Lying in the darkness, bleeding from 17 shrapnel wounds, he bandaged himself as best he could. He applied pressure to stop the bleeding. He went into shock and fought through it. Then he waited. 5 hours passed before litter bearers could reach him. 5 hours of lying wounded in a shell hole while the battle raged around him. 5 hours of wondering if help would come at all. When the stretcher team finally arrived, Doss was barely conscious. They lifted him onto the litter and began carrying him toward the rear. They did not get far. An enemy tank attack forced the litter bearers to take cover. They set Doss down and dove for safety. As they did, Doss looked over and saw another wounded soldier lying nearby. The man was in worse shape than he was. The man needed the stretcher more. Doss rolled off the litter. With 17 pieces of shrapnel in his body, with 5 hours of blood loss, with wounds that would have incapacitated most men entirely, Desmond Doss crawled off his own stretcher. He dragged himself over to the other wounded soldier and directed the litter bearers to take the other man first. "Give him your attention," Doss told them. "He needs it more than I do." The bearers complied. They loaded the other soldier onto the litter and carried him away. Doss lay on the ground and waited for them to return. He was still waiting when the sniper found him. The bullet entered his left arm, passed through, exited, and struck again higher up. The impact shattered the bones. Doss felt his arm go dead. A compound fracture. The kind of wound that ended military careers. The kind of wound that could kill through blood loss alone. Doss looked around for something to stabilize his arm. His eyes fell on the only thing available. A broken rifle lying in the dirt nearby. The man who had vowed never to touch a gun picked up the rifle stock. He bound it to his shattered arm, fashioning a makeshift splint. It was the only time in the entire war that Desmond Doss touched a weapon. And he used it not to harm, but to save himself, so that he might continue serving others. Then he began to crawl. 300 yards of rough terrain lay between Doss and the aid station. 300 yards of rocks and craters and debris. 300 yards with 17 pieces of shrapnel in his legs and a shattered arm bound to a rifle stock. 300 yards under fire. He crawled every inch of it. When Doss finally reached the aid station, he was evacuated to the hospital ship USS Mercy. His war was over. He had given everything he had. His body was broken. His left arm would never fully recover. But he was alive. It was on the Mercy that Doss realized something was missing: his Bible, the small, leather-bound book that Dorothy had given him before he shipped out. The book he had carried through Guam, through Leyte, through the hell of Hacksaw Ridge. The book that had sustained him through years of persecution and months of combat. It was gone, lost somewhere on the battlefield where he had been wounded. Doss was devastated. "That was my main source of strength, all during the war and in the service," he later said. "And then, when I lost it, I was lost." He wrote to Dorothy, telling her what had happened. He hoped someone might have found it. He prayed it had not been destroyed. Word reached the men of B Company that their medic had lost his Bible, the same men who had once thrown boots at Doss while he prayed. The same men who had mocked his faith and called him a coward. The same men whose lives he had saved on Hacksaw Ridge. They went back for it. The soldiers of B Company returned to the battlefield where Doss had been wounded. They searched through the debris and the shell craters. They looked among the rocks and the bodies. They risked their lives on ground that was still contested by Japanese forces. And they found it. The Bible was recovered and mailed home to Desmond Doss. The book that had sustained his faith through the darkest moments of his life was returned to him by men who had come to share that faith. The transformation was complete. The men who had despised him now revered him. The company that had rejected him would never forget him. On October 12, 1945, Desmond Doss stood on the White House lawn. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. Millions of men were coming home. And the nation was honoring its heroes. President Harry S. Truman held the Medal of Honor in his hands. He looked at the skinny medic from Virginia, the conscientious objector who had saved 75 lives without firing a shot. Truman took Doss's hand and held it throughout the reading of the citation. When the last words were spoken, the president leaned close. "I'm proud of you," Truman said. "You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." He placed the Medal of Honor around Desmond Doss's neck. The first conscientious objector ever to receive the nation's highest military decoration. The only conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II. Among those watching was Captain Jack Glover, the same officer who had once tried to have Doss transferred out of the unit. The same commander who had doubted whether a man without a weapon could ever be a real soldier. Glover was one of the men Doss had saved on Hacksaw Ridge. "He was one of the bravest persons alive," Glover would later say, "and then to have him end up saving my life was the irony of the whole thing." Doss accepted the honor with characteristic humility. He did not see himself as a hero. He had simply done what he believed was right. He had followed the golden rule. He had loved his neighbor as himself. "I feel that I received the Congressional Medal of Honor," Doss explained, "because I kept the golden rule that we read in Matthew 7:12. All things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them." The war took its toll. Desmond Doss contracted tuberculosis during his service in the Pacific. He spent nearly 6 years in hospitals after returning home. Doctors removed his left lung and 5 ribs. He lived the rest of his life breathing with a single lung. But he never stopped serving. Doss used his Medal of Honor stipend to fund a civilian rescue service in Georgia. When Boy Scouts became trapped in a gas-filled cavern, the aging veteran worked longer than anyone else to save them. He continued speaking about his faith until his body finally gave out. Corporal Desmond Thomas Doss died on March 23, 2006. He was 87 years old. He was buried at Chattanooga National Cemetery with full military honors. In the bloodiest battle of the Pacific, where survival meant killing, one man proved that the greatest courage is not taking life. It is saving it. While everybody else was taking lives, Desmond Doss was saving them, one more at a time.